Live. Hi, everyone. Welcome to this week on .NET Live. My name is Cecil Phillip, and today's a little bit different because we're usually not on a Wednesday, but I had to do what I had to do to get Bryan to come on to talk to us about building Meadow and IoT. And so, Bryan, you're the only person, you're one of the few people, let me say that I actually moved my show for. So I had to do it because I thought it was really important to be able to get you on and learn about some of the new things that you've been doing with Meadow and with IoT and .NET in general. So definitely really excited to have you on.
Thanks for having me on board, and thanks for being flexible with your schedule.
Sure. So why don't you, just for the folks that may have not seen you before, maybe they haven't seen the previous show that you were on before, why don't you tell us a little bit about like who you are and even a little bit about Wilderness Labs and what does Wilderness Labs do?
Yeah, for sure. So as you mentioned, my name is Bryan Costanich, and I am co-founder and CEO of Wilderness Labs. And some of you folks may actually know me from Xamarin. I helped build that a bit back. It's been a while now, and I created the education division over there. I built Xamarin University, which some of you are familiar with, in the Docs team, and about 5 years ago, started a new company after we got acquired by Microsoft, and just how Xamarin brought the .NET developer ecosystem to mobile, we're doing something very similar. We're bringing that .NET ecosystem to embedded development. So this idea now that you can put computing in anything, anywhere, and we're enabling, folks with .NET skills to build real hardware.
Awesome. So I definitely want to dive deeper into that because I know for a lot of .NET folks, IoT is kind of like this interesting little toy thing where we have Raspberry Pis and sensors, and we check the temperature of the room, and we see how much moisture is in the soil. But I feel like the industry is way deeper than that, and I feel like there's a lot more and a lot bigger applications that we're not even really thinking about. So that's definitely something I want to make sure that me and you get a chance to talk about as we go into it. But before we do that, I definitely want to take a moment to, as always, we always give a quick shout out to the folks that are inside of the chat. This is a live show, and one of the good things about being live is that it allows us to be able to access folks from like all over the place. Now, me personally, folks may know, like I'm from the Caribbean, but right now I'm in Florida. I know inside of the chat, I'm looking already, we have some folks here from Brazil. I see India. I'm seeing folks from Africa. Let me see what else we got in here. We got South America and tons of other places. So if you don't mind, go ahead and drop a link in the chat. Let us know where you're from. Let us know where you're watching from. Let us know what country you're from, just so we can always, give you folks a quick shout out. Now, so Bryan, before we kind of move forward with your piece, what I want to do is I want to share a couple of links just to, kind of do some housekeeping, I guess. And let's talk about some of the fun things that have been kind of going on in the world of .NET. So I'm going to share my screen really quickly as soon as I remember the buttons to press. Here we go. All right. So a couple of links that I want to share with everyone. So first and foremost, since this is IoT month on .NET Live TV, I want to show you this IoT for Beginners curriculum that's freely available on the Microsoft GitHub org right now today. So if we kind of scroll down, so my team actually worked on this. A lot of our developer advocates put together this curriculum over a long time, over a period of months. Folks like Jim Bennett and tons of other folks. They pretty much take you from zero to hero with like this 12-week, 24-lesson IoT basics curriculum. So if you're interested in learning about IoT, if you've never touched IoT before, if you don't know how to get started, if you don't know what any of that stuff is or what IoT even means, this might be a great place for you to start, just so you can get an idea about like what are some of the things that you can expect and what do you need to do. Now, I know some of y'all have different levels of experience. I believe this is written, at least from the code perspective, I believe this is primarily C++ and Python. So you are going to need to know a little bit of code. This is not like a computer science exam or anything like that. It's nothing that serious. But you are going to need to know a little bit of code to be able to go through this. So we can definitely, but again, this is definitely something cool for you to check out. And I know Bryan, before we came on stream, said to well, Cecil, there's no Meadow stuff in here. He's right, there isn't. But you know what? That's always a good opportunity for folks in the community to send us pull requests. If this is something that you're interested in seeing, if you'd love to see a Meadow for beginners thing with like some C# code or F# code or something like that, definitely let us know, because without your feedback, like, we're not going to know what are the things you want us to work on.
We even support VB.net.
Oh wow, VB.net. I'm curious if anyone's interested in writing IoT apps with VB.net. I'd definitely love to hear that too. If that's something that you want to do.
In all seriousness, though, I gotta
it.
say, like, we all sort of love to laugh at VB.net, but it's a serious language, and it actually has there's some things in VB.net that you still can't do in C#. And
Yeah.
The VB.net community just is really in love with it, and we actually have customers building in VB.net. And it's kind of like, maybe we should stop picking on it. Maybe it's time.
I'll be honest with you. I was a big fan of VB before, like, I actually got a job working as a developer. I remember back when I was in college, actually before I came to the United States, and back when I was still in Antigua, we had this one extra course that we did, and it was all about like creating UIs, and it was VB.net, but it was literally all drag and drop, right? It was when you went into Visual Studio, you dragged and dropped controls, and you had like the what's it called, like the grid and the little ruler, and you positioned it, and then you double clicked on the control, and then that gave you like the handler for the event. Like, oh, this is easy. Put a button, double click the button. Here, Mr. Button, please do this for me, and then you move on, right? You just keep clicking and adding buttons to it. And so that was pretty cool. So again, I'm a fan of VB. So seriously, if folks are interested in building and doing things with VB, definitely let us know. Definitely love to hear about it. Looking in the chat really quick, Jose is saying, I used VB in 1998. Now I use C# and F#. All right. See, well, I mean, I'm not the only one that started with VB, so that's definitely very cool to know.
I think we've all spent our time in VB for sure. I mean, honestly, VB and BASIC is what sort of built Microsoft in a way, right? That was a huge part of Microsoft's growing up and attracting developers. I mean, VB6 made app developers out of anyone.
Yeah, I mean, it looks like we have someone in the chat here as well that says, I spent years with VBA, then VB5 and VB6. So there you go. I know there's tons of folks that have, started their career, built their careers, using some of these types of tools.
So the great thing about Meadow is that it's .NET language agnostic. We have full support internally, or we have full support first class in our tooling for C#, F#, and VB.net. And that means like we have templates for all of those as well, so you can file new Meadow app and create it in any of those languages.
That's really, I didn't know y'all had VB templates too. That's definitely cool to know.
Yeah, it was actually a request from more than one customer.
That is,
and it makes sense. I mean, for us, Meadow is the mission behind Wilderness Labs is to make hardware as fast and easy as building web or mobile apps, right? And so it makes sense for us to have something like VB.net, which is super approachable. I mean, that's all, it's sort of part and parcel and really aligns with that mission, I think.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with you. What if else what people folks are saying? VB6 was my first language in high school. So again, like there's definitely a lineage here of folks that I know for sure. Even though you might not be doing VB today, you've done VB at some point in time in your journey to become a software developer. So definitely got to give it some respect. Moving forward really quickly. So want to give a quick shout out to my buddy Bryan Costanich. Bryan writes a lot of really cool blog posts, and he wrote this one on the .NET blog, where he pretty much just gives us an introduction to the new .NET MAUI Toolkit. So if folks don't know what MAUI is, .NET MAUI stands for multi-application user interface. I think that's what it stands for, multi-application user interface. And pretty much .NET MAUI is kind of being positioned as like the successor or the next version of Xamarin Forms. So Xamarin Forms had its own Xamarin Forms community toolkit. Now what you're seeing here is that that's going to be updated to be able to support MAUI applications. And so Brandon kind of goes through here and shows you what's in it, and what can you do, what can you expect from the toolkit, and all these types of stuff. And just as before, it is open source, right? So you can head over to GitHub. You can click on the link, and you could check out the code, add it to your apps, and kind of see what it actually feels like to use the toolkit in some of your applications. So if
You
you're
even
interested,
talked about supporting MAUI and Meadow, actually.
oh, you can do that.
So the our flagship board, the F7,
Mm-hmm.
the main microcontroller in there is an STM32F7, and that has hardware accelerated 2D graphics. So you can actually drive displays and whatnot, pretty seamlessly. We've got to build in some of the support for the direct. It's called DMA2D, and it's direct memory access, and we've got to do some of the plumbing there. But yeah, once we get that stuff in, we should be able to drive those at speed and run something like that. I mean, obviously, you wouldn't run a 1080p app off of a microcontroller, but like touch interfaces for small industrial controls and stuff, no problem.
Yeah. And I think that's a good example too of, what are some of the applications of IoT, right? Kind of like what we were talking about earlier, right? Like what are some of the things that we could do as developers? And if we could kind of plug some of the knowledge that I already have with MAUI and have that integrated with Meadow, I think that's going to be a really interesting, definitely really interesting use case.
Yeah, I agree.
All right, so let's take a look at this last link that I want to share with folks. I feel like I've been talking about this every week for the last month, but NETconf, November 9th through 11th. NETconf is like our free virtual developer conference. This is where .NET 6 is going to be released, and .NET 6, if folks don't know, is going to be our LTS release. So long-term support, which means that it's going to be around for a long time. It's going to be supported for a long time, so you could, build and deploy your apps with confidence, knowing that there's going to be someone that you could call on the phone and be like, I need help, right? So definitely make sure that you go ahead and click the button, save the date for .NETconf. The agenda and all of those types of things are almost done, I believe. So I think if I click this little agenda link, it's not all there yet, but it's getting flushed out. I've seen some of the sessions that look really exciting. So if you're interested in learning about some of the new .NET 6 things, some of the new Azure things, some of the things that the community is doing, definitely make sure you come over and check it out as well. Okay, now that's enough of me. I'm going to disappear. Boom, my screen's gone. So this is where I always say, no, this is no longer the Cecil show. This is going to be the Bryan show, right? And so, Bryan, first thing I want to talk to you about, right? First question out the bat. We've had you on the show before. We've spoken to you and other folks about IoT before. But I feel like we've always seen like these very simple use cases, which is important, right? You got to show the hello world before you show like, the big mega application. But I know for a lot of folks, it's not always easy to know, okay, now that I have this power, right? Like now that I have the ability to build these things, what do I do with it? So I think it'll be interesting for you if you could shed a little bit of a light on, what are folks doing with IoT exactly? Like outside of like, checking the temperature or the amount of water that's in the soil, right? Like what are folks doing? What are big enterprises doing? What does it mean for me as a developer? Like, is this something that I could, focus on for my career going forward? Like, should I really dive into this thing? Like, is it going to be like that mobile revolution where now everyone is a mobile developer? Like what can we expect from this going forward?
Yeah, that's such a great question, and it's really interesting. We're still at kind of the beginning of this new revolution, and when we talk about use cases, it's interesting to like sort of put the IoT market into perspective a little bit. So the IoT market is just enormous, and I'm sure we're going to talk about that in a bit. But if you sort of break it down, there's three pieces of the IoT market. And when people think about IoT, the first thing that they think about is like smart thermostats and smart ovens and fridges and things like that. And these are that's what we call consumer IoT. And if you look at the overall market, you see there's this little tiny sliver of the market, and it's somewhere around 10%, and that's consumer IoT. And then the rest 90% is divided up into these other two sections. And there's commercial IoT, which is somewhere around 30-ish%. And then there's this massive section, which is about 60%, and that's industrial IoT. And consumer IoT are things like medical technologies, smart buildings, asset tracking. Basically, that's sort of like you think of like consumer IoT, but commercialized. So things that you would buy for, in a package, but in a consumer use. And then this other massive section of IoT, which is where the vast majority of all development is happening right now, is industrial IoT. And that is like transportation, logistics, ag tech, it goes on factory stuff and in industrial automation and stuff. And that's really, our customers generally sort of play in those two markets. They're building either industrial IoT or commercial IoT. And so we've got folks on the commercial side, they're building. We have folks building medical devices. We have folks building. We have a big customer that's doing smart windows. So the idea behind this is that you're building, the windows would open and close for passive heating and cooling, and then you go to your building panel and open and close windows, or you can open from your phone. Pull up the Bluetooth and control it that way. And then in like the industrial side of the house, we have people doing stuff in agriculture. So not just soil sensing and chemistry and whatnot, but on large scales, right? Where you have an interconnected network of devices doing interesting things and talking to each other and making decisions and then uploading to the cloud, et cetera. And that's really, like I said, that's really where most of our folks are building. We also have a number of folks doing things like in industrial automation. So they're attaching, they're doing bolt-on solutions where they're adding intelligence to existing machinery. They're automating factory processes, or they're getting insights from things that are happening within a factory floor. Or maybe they're doing logistics work where they're doing tracking, and maybe they're doing something with containers and GPS tracking and like sensing the humidity and temperature of the bananas inside a container, and then also always knowing where those are at. So that's really kind of our customers are generally folks doing that. They're folks for whom security is super important because that's a big part of our play, and also ongoing maintenance, being able to deploy applications and then maintain them in the field and send over-the-air updates and whatnot. So that's kind of that's really where we play. We play in those industrial and commercial use cases generally.
Okay. Now, yesterday, I know there was an announcement from Amazon, and they released like a ton of devices. Like there's like smart thermostats and security cameras and all of these types of things. Still commercial, I suppose. Like these are for your house. But from a developer perspective, I'm just thinking in the back of my head, I'm sure I'm going to have to log in with an account. I'm sure I'm going to have to set some stuff on my phone. I'm sure I'm going to have to, set up Wi-Fi and all these types of things. And in my head, from a developer perspective, I'm like, that must be where like the IoT part comes into play. I'm assuming, right? Because now I am, again, like there's sensors and gauges and all kinds of stuff in those little devices. But now I have to connect that to like the world that I'm familiar with, right? Like I have to connect that to my phone or my browser or some other thing, right? That's going to allow me to interface with this device, or at least to set it up, right? So now I could just kind of let it do its job. Another case that I think about, and you can let me know if this is IoT or not. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But I think a lot about e-vehicles, right? Like electric vehicles, these self-driving cars, all these types of things. Most cars today, or a lot of folks that have cars today, I guess it depends if some folks drive and some folks don't drive. I know there are cars where they can sense when other vehicles are next to them, or cars that have cameras and stuff like that inside of them, or whenever they're parking, like they use GPSs and other types of sensors to figure out, well, is the car straight or not? Like, can I parallel park myself or not? Is that IoT, or is that like something completely different?
Sure. Yeah. No, I mean, the interesting thing about IoT is it's like such an overloaded term. The idea that something is a thing and it's connected, right? That's IoT. And even it's funny because we even use IoT for things that are not necessarily connected. Maybe it's not really the internet, maybe it's just the OT, but it's really a broad category. But all those things that you talked about, this is actually a really good and a really interesting segue into understanding this revolution, because like all those things that you talked about, those are sort of the hero experiences of IoT. But the hero experiences of IoT represent such a tiny fraction of the market. So the first things that that you talked about were like the Amazon stuff, and Amazon came out with some really interesting things the other day, right? They announced some interesting things, but those are almost all consumer IoT. And then cars are sort of interesting and use cases there, and things are, more and more things are connected. But if you look at this is really fascinating. So the overall market for IoT is just so enormous. And the things that we see are it's the very tip of the iceberg of what's happening here. And in fact, today, there is no larger single market in tech than IoT. It's 3 times bigger than mobile. It's already enormous. It's 3 times bigger than mobile. It's 5 times bigger than big data and AI combined in terms of like spend. And then if you talk about devices, like compute devices by the numbers, there are trillions of microcontrollers out there in the world, and many of those are now connected, right? So, and what's interesting is that if you look at this from like if we step back and kind of take 100,000 foot view of this, you look at humankind's technological progress through time, and it started with, the first compute was like, the first real compute was like mainframes, right? These big, giant vacuum tube machines that took up entire rooms, and then that miniaturized, and then we had the desktop computing revolution. And famously, Bill Gates had this mission in the 80s, which was to put a computer on every desk in every home, right? And then we're like so far beyond that now. But that, and then the web, and what happened is that was like a 15-year thing, like, desktop computing was everything. And then the web hit, and the web was just this massive new epoch, right? And everything was web. Everything was web apps. And then web sort of turned into cloud, and then mobile hit. And so like kind of the last decade, everything's been all about mobile, right? We've been talking about mobile. We eat, breathe mobile. We just talked about MAUI, and a big, the driver of MAUI was Xamarin Forms, and Xamarin Forms was mobile, and blah, 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 right? But what's happening now is that we're now entering this new epoch, right? This new era of computing in which we've moved from a computer on every desk to being able to put a computer in almost everything, everywhere, right? And it's really interesting because you look at one of our boards, and this is our F7. This is our F7 developer board, and the main microcontroller on there is an STM32F7, as I mentioned before. That is effectively a Pentium. That's a Pentium, it's got the processing power of a Pentium plus all of the hardware stuff. And so the idea that we can put a Pentium in everything is driving this new revolution. And that, like I said, the interesting thing about this revolution is that the revolutions that came before had hero experiences, right? So like mobile is a really good example of this. 15 years ago now, when Steve Jobs got up on screen, and he's like showing this piece of glass, and he's sliding and doing animation and stuff, and it was cinematic, and you thought, oh my God, this is the future, right? This is the thing. And then everyone, and then Android hit to fill in that market, and now nearly the majority of human beings on the planet have a mobile phone, a smartphone, right? And what's interesting is that as big as that was, we really felt it because of that hero experience. Like, just as an exercise, as a thinking exercise, remember navigating in your car or whatever pre Google Maps and after Google Maps, right? It's coming, like, it really changed our lives. And the thing about IoT is that it doesn't have quite the same hero experience, like that mobile had, but it's still this massive revolution. In just a few years, it's expected that there will be 10 times as many non-mobile connected devices on the planet as human beings. That is like those numbers. We don't even, that's 75 billion, 75 billion devices. And 75 billion devices. And even like I struggle with those numbers, because how do we don't have the frame of reference to even understand that. But one thing that's clear is like, that's really going to drive a massive shift in how we interact with the world and cultural, right? Because just as navigating with before Google Maps and after Google Maps, like this revolution is really going to change the world. And so it's massive, it's happening, and it's so important because it's funny, when we started Xamarin, I remember I used to go around and tell people, look, if you're not doing mobile, if you're not learning mobile, you're going to miss out. And now 10, 15 years later, I'm going around saying, look, if you're not learning embedded, if you're not learning IoT, you're missing out. Because if you want to continue to be competitive in as an engineer, as an architect, etc., like this is where a majority of efforts are now moving. And what's interesting is that there was a couple of years, and this was 2 years old, and this has only gone up since then. IDC released a report on IoT, and they found that nearly every single company of any size, like above like 50 employees, nearly every single company was investing in IoT. And most of those projects were actually failing. They were failing early, which is good, but they're still failing, which is bad. And part of that is because they don't, like IoT was this brand new thing, and no one knew how to do it. And it was all embedded C, which is like a really heavy, like I can't write an embedded C. I'd rather go grind my teeth on the curb or something, like, it's terrible.
Right.
And so, like all of a sudden everyone is having to do IoT projects, and, like there's just a lot of those aren't going anywhere, but the revolution is here and it's happening, and there's lots of money being spent on it and stuff. And so that's, ultimately that's why we're around.
That's awesome. So I know I'm just looking over in the chat really quickly. So a lot of folks have questions about Meadow, and it looks like Jorge is already in here answering some of those. But for those of us that are on video, right, like let's see if we can dive into some of these.
Sure.
So
yeah.
The first one, so Martin's asking, what devices are supported by Meadow? And I guess before we answer that question, let's take one step back. And I know you have boards, and I know you have an operating system. Like, is Meadow the combination of the OS and the board, or is Meadow platform the OS, and then you could just run on X amount of supported boards? Like, how do we kind of frame that picture?
Yeah, so today Meadow runs on our boards, and you can kind of think of it as almost like the iPhone. Like, we control the experience. It's very up level. We make sure that like everything works really, really well with that hardware, and you don't have to fight with like this or that thing. But that it's also plug and play in the sense that like you can add things to those boards. You can go to SparkFront or Adafruit, and you can buy sensors or displays or whatever, plug them in, and you just have an API, and it's beautiful, and it just works out of the gate. And we've been able to do that by sort of like controlling the hardware. Longer term, we'll have a whole fleet of devices that will be, Meadow enabled. But today it's the Meadow boards. And when you look at like, okay, so what Meadow is, there's the hardware aspect. But then there's the software stack, right? And the way that sort of shakes out is that we have a thing called Meadow OS, and Meadow OS is kind of a pancake, right? At the bottom of the pancake stack is a micro real-time operating system designed for microcontrollers called NetX, and we've got a heavily modified custom version of NetX, and then on top of that we have the .NET Runtime, and that enables .NET applications to run in this context, in the context of a microcontroller with no desktop OS, right? This in the sense that in microcontroller, the embedded world, basically, instead of having a heavy OS, you have a very light OS, and then your application is the thing. There's just enough OS to support your application and the services that your application needs. It's not like multi-user, multi-window. It's nothing like that. It's very lightweight. And then on top of that, we have our Meadow Core APIs. And the Meadow Core APIs are the way that you access the hardware. So things like digital ports and analog ports and SPI and I2C and all that great hardware stuff is exposed via these beautiful .NET APIs that make it super, super easy. And then on top of that, we have this thing called Meadow Foundation. And Meadow Foundation is this massive open source library of peripheral drivers, industrial control frameworks, and libraries, so that really when you do grab a sensor off a SparkFront or whatever and you plug it in, then there's a driver for it, there's a beautiful API, and it just works out of the box. So you can focus on building your application rather than fighting with CMake and trying to get like version of this working with version of that and blah, blah, blah. It just works. The idea here is that this is productivity out of the gate.
So it's kind of like what you said, like because you control the experience, now you could make sure you control like the hardware OS experience, you can make sure that the developer experience is that much better. And
exactly.
That also makes me think a lot about kind of going back to your Xamarin days, right? Like it makes me think about Xamarin Forms, which, kind of we were talking about MAUI a little bit. How for me, Xamarin Forms made it easier because now I could use what I'm familiar with, like my tooling in Visual Studio and .NET and these types of things, but I could deploy to these other devices that are technically foreign to me, right? Like I might not have known Objective-C or Swift or, Java, and I think some folks write C++ for a little bit more high performance controls and things of that nature for those mobile devices. I might not know how to do those things, but I know .NET, right? And I know how to drag and drop things on a designer, and I understand how that world works. So is it fair to say Meadow provides somewhat of a similar experience, at least in terms of like how you approach IoT, allowing us to be able to, again, reuse our skills to deploy to like this new world?
Yes, exactly that. That's exactly it. The idea here is that with Meadow, there's still a learning curve. You're still, you still have to learn how to put some hardware together, et cetera. It's a lot like being a C# developer and learning Xamarin, right? There's still things you have to learn, but what you don't have to learn is .NET, because you already know that. You already know C#, you know how to program, you know how to code. And even if you don't really know that, like C# and .NET is just such a welcoming environment. It's such a lovely place to develop in, the tooling, the framework, the platform, everything, right? So yeah, absolutely. The idea behind Meadow is 100% bring your existing skills and get be welcomed into embedded development with them.
Okay. All right. So next question I want to pull up. So this one's from our friend Jose. Jose's here like every week, multiple times a week.
Awesome.
So shout out to Jose for sure. What is the size of the .NET runtime on Meadow IoT? I know folks still feel like .NET is this big, heavy thing, and I feel like, well, I mean, I feel like people ask these questions because, again, it does have that lineage, right? Like you go back to, .NET Framework 2.0 and 3.5 and 4.5.
When things are like 40 megabytes at a minimum, yeah.
Right. You're talking about you're installing gigs of stuff. When you include Visual Studio in the tooling, like you need gigs of space before I could even do Hello World, right? But now with Core, it's a little bit smaller, right? And I can imagine for these embedded devices, it's even that much more important for it to be small, for it to be able to run in some restricted space, and also to be performant in that space. So I'm guessing you have a fairly lightweight footprint, right, for running .NET and Meadow IoT.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's a great question, and that actually begets. And by the way, hello, Jose. I know you had a number of other questions, and I hope to unpack them here as well. So, .NET really has matured over the years, and part of the maturation is also editing and curating and cutting things down and throwing things away and making it smaller, right? And our the runtime that we use it's actually incredibly small. So the actual runtime on device, I think, is 2 megabytes, which is almost nothing. Yeah, it's very, very small. And then then there's like MS Core Lib, the core class library and things like that. And that adds another, I think it's 4 megabytes or something, 3 or 4 megabytes, and then your app stuff. But the great thing about that is that, and this is something we've been working on, there's 2 technologies here, and really hats off to the work that Xamarin did on this, by the way. There's 2 technologies that are super important, which are linking and AOT compilation. And those are the features that we're working on integrating right now. So linking, also known as tree shaking, takes all your assemblies, right? And a typical Hello World Meadow app, I think, might be like 8-10 megabytes or something. And the idea is that with linking, you shake the tree, and all the stuff that you're not using goes away, and all of a sudden now that gets very, very small. And with AOT, it takes that from a performance perspective. It'll take that, and we've actually been working really hard on AOT for our microcontroller, which means, a thumb to back end. And there's a lot of heavy duty work there that I actually don't even understand. I see a lot of assembly code come through the Slack channel, and it's just like, oh, okay, of my pay grade. In any case, the idea that with that is that we can actually compile straight down to the metal. We can go right to LLVM and then thumb to back end, and now you have like 100% performance. And you have inlining and all that magic stuff there. And so we've done a lot of work to optimize that, and we also we're standing on the shoulders of giants, right? We're standing on all of the work that Microsoft and Xamarin have done to make that possible. And to sort of further that, Jose, you also had another question about like the runtime and stuff and what do we support. So today what we support is we're sort of core compliant. So we fully support .NET Standard 2.1. And as .NET 6 matures, we'll switch over to that as well. So sometime in the new year, we'll get full .NET 6 support. It's not quite ready yet because it's missing some of the things that we need for embedded. And then we've got to do, once it's like ready, then we have got actually a bunch of work to do behind it to take the stuff, all the great work that the Microsoft and the Mono teams, have done, and sort of extend that. But today it's full .NET Standard 2.1 apps. It's not, Jose, you asked if it was based on like the micro framework or nano framework. It's not. It's none of that legacy stuff. This is full .NET, right? This isn't like so. And the great thing about this is it means that if you want to go to NuGet and grab NuGet packages for X, Y, or Z, you can get modern NuGet packages. Nothing has to be super specially made. It is full .NET. It's a full .NET experience. And we've got fantastic tooling, so we support Visual Studio for Windows, Visual Studio for Mac, VS Code. And then if you want to script or integrate into other things like JetBrains, we have Meadow CLI. Actually, all of our extensions use the Meadow CLI under the hood. So you have a command line interface for deploying to Meadow, and it's very smooth. It's very fast. It's actually faster to deploy to a Meadow app than it is to deploy Arduino apps. I mean, it's literally like seconds to, if you've got, there's a first deploy, it takes a little bit of time because we have to push up like the MS Core lib and things like that. But like subsequent deployments, we just squirt over the changes and it's like seconds.
Nice. So I know we've been talking a long time about like IoT and Meadow and like, .NET and things of that nature. Do you think it would be possible? Because we're like 40 minutes in now. Do you think it would be possible for us to take a look at maybe like a quick demo and see what does it actually look like to like build something with Meadow on, I don't know, like Visual Studio and using the CLI and stuff like that?
Yeah, absolutely. Why don't I, this is the great opportunity. So I'll share something I got up right now, which is, so this is Visual Studio for Mac. And this is a new feature, by the way. I want to show a new feature that we just released in the last beta, which is SQLite. And the idea here, again, remember this, our mission is to make hardware development as fast and as easy as making web or mobile apps. And so part of that is like, okay, so you're integrating with some sensors, you're reading some data, et cetera. You want to save it locally, and then you want to maybe at some point you want to squirt it up to the cloud. Maybe also you want to make it available via a Bluetooth service and have a companion app, or maybe you want a RESTful web server on there so that you can actually go in and view data over time, right? So that's, in order to do that, you have to save that locally. So this, like I said, this is a new feature as of this last beta. We have full SQLite support. And not only that, but we actually made sure out of the gate, we had full SQLite.NET support, which means you can use Frank Kruger's SQLite ORM to actually save to the database without ever writing any SQL code. So here's a model, here's a sensor model, and it's just, this is kind of dumbing data. We have an ID here, primary key, and then a timestamp of when the sensor data came in, and then like some value, right? And this, by the way, is from, this is our Meadow core samples in our Meadow core samples repo, and I'll actually add this link. I can put it in our chat, and then you can paste it to folks.
Sure.
So you can actually see this code. This is SQLite code, and this is a sample, and it's just showing like all the different things, and you see configure database, insert dummy data, blah blah blah. But if you look at this looks exactly like just regular SQLite code, unlike Xamarin or anywhere else, right? So here's a database path, and we've got these nice data directories. So Meadow OS file system data directory. So it talks about this gets the data directory. Use this for and then so we created a SQLite connection, and then we added any of our tables. If the tables already exist, of course, SQLite doesn't won't delete them or anything. And then to add data, it's database.insert insert that data, and it's like I said, there's nothing special here. This is all just regular .NET code. If you know how to write .NET in C#, you already know how to do this. And in all of this stuff, like I said, updating a data from the database exactly the same way. And I mentioned that this was, the user experience here is just incredible, right? So we plug in a Meadow board into Visual Studio or Visual Studio for Mac. It shows up in the drop down here as if doing like Xamarin development, and you're choosing your phone. You hit your play button and it deploys, and it takes just seconds. And then here we are, we're inserting some records into the database. Now it looks like it's slow, but it's actually because we're doing thread.sleep in here to get new date time values. But right. It's there it is. We've inserted some rows, and then look at that. We read back the data. The data is so fast. This is coming again from a microcontroller, and then we're doing a bunch of operations. And as I said, if you can, if you can write C# code, you can write Meadow code. And one of the things that we've done here is that we've invested tremendous amounts of effort into getting started and learning and being successful on hardware, right? Because we understand that this is a new thing. And I probably, as well as anyone, understand that there's a learning curve here. Like the Xamarin University didn't come out of nowhere. There was a reason why we had to create that. Sure. And so we have gone to great lengths to provide tutorials and content around doing exactly that. So, I'm going to show you real quickly. So if when you pick up a Meadow board, you'll come to developer.wildernesslabs.co, and this is our doc site, and there's a fantastic getting started guide, and it'll walk you through everything, how to put together your dev kit. There's even a soldering demo if you order it unsoldered. And then, there's fantastic documentation on how to get started. And I want to show you, by the way, this is a picture of the latest Meadow board. It's just absolutely gorgeous. But I want to show you Meadow Foundation. So one of the things that I said earlier was that the idea here is that it's a plug and play experience. So Meadow Foundation is this massive open source library of peripheral drivers, industrial control algorithms, etc. And you can actually find the source at Wilderness Labs on GitHub, Meadow Foundation. But if you look at the library list here, there is so many sensors and displays and motors, circuits, things like that we support out of the box. And again, the documentation for these is just absolutely incredible. So here is BME 280, which is a really popular temperature, pressure, and humidity sensor. If you're doing climate monitoring, basically everyone uses this sensor. And here it is. Here's code how to use it, and there's a lot of different patterns. This is actually something that's really interesting. You can use and actually, while I'm on it, we can talk about this. You can use classic events to listen to, listen to sensor changes, or you can use a modern iObservable pattern where you can pass in a filter and you say, look, only notify me if the temperature has changed by so many degrees. So there's really it's really nice working with these things, and they all, like all the sensors in Meadow Foundation, are very curated and very consistent. So every single sensor that's like reading stuff follows this pattern. It's read, start updating, stop updating. So the idea here is that if you want to do a one-off read and then go to sleep, then you call read. If you want to do like automatic updates where it automatically listens for, reads a sensor every minute or every few seconds or whatever, you can just start it and then forget about it. And we do automatic oversampling, which means it takes a bunch of reads and then it averages those values so you don't get a bunch of noise. All this stuff is just built in, and we make it super, super easy. Like the idea here is that if you want to build hardware, we really do massively simplify it. And we think about like we're all developers at Wilderness Labs. And so we all think about this from a developer first perspective. Like, how can we make this easier? How can we make this streamlined? How can we make it faster and more productive? And so that's really what we've been focusing on.
And so quick question coming in from YouTube. So Nicholas is asking, how does one secure a Meadow device? So I'm going to guess I'm guessing he's not talking about like, how do I secure the hardware?
Lock it down with a lock? No. So this is actually so Nicholas, is a really good question, because security is a huge part of our stack. And this is something that we're sort of, we're still in beta and we're rolling out these features. But the idea with Meadow is that unlike, most IoT out there today, which is just kind of wide open for hacking, Meadow intends to be secure by default. And I mean that from the hardware on up, right? So when we provision a Meadow device, for instance, it automatically creates a private public key pair, stores the private key in a secure enclave, and then it has identity, right? So from there on out, that Meadow has an identity, and it can sign messages, it can sign payloads. Other actors can take the public key, encrypt payloads to that, to the Meadow, et cetera. And then we also we're going to enable flash encryption, so everything on the device will be fully encrypted. So it won't. So even if you were like in there and you're trying to read, you're listening to like, talking to the hard drive of the Meadow, it'll all be encrypted. And then we're working on over-the-air updates, which we're almost done with. And the idea there is that if there's security updates, you want to push out a new application, then you'll be able to manage that, through the CLI or through the cloud and push that down. And so we really like security is a huge part of our play, and we're thinking about it from top to bottom. And as a commercial or industrial, developer, the idea here is that, let's say you want to go out to the market, you built this awesome widget, and you're shipping 10,000 of these, right? So you would order Meadow from us, and it would actually already come provisioned. You could upload your application, your Meadow package to the CLI or to our cloud app. And then you would have those boards by the time they got to you, they would actually already be secured, encrypted, and your application along with configuration data would already be loaded on there. So you can put it directly into your circuit, directly into your product, and go, and not even worry about that, right? And we're also thinking about this in terms of like components that are security related, making sure that there's no default username and password if you're doing, like we're thinking about putting those, how we can craft those and make those in, and put those in, build them into the platform so that you get them for free, as well as documentation and education, right? Because security is like more than just encrypting your flash or, having good public key infrastructure. It's really more than that. So we're really thinking about this from a very holistic perspective.
Gotcha. That makes a lot of sense. So we do have a few minutes left. This has been a really interesting conversation, to say the least. Now, a lot of folks have been in the chat and they've been saying, all the boards are sold out. I can't get a Meadow board. And this is what happens, right? We entice them. We entice them with, oh, look at this really cool stuff that you could get, but not quite yet, because the boards. So, but I think that's a good problem to have, right? One, it shows that obviously there is definitely demand for Meadow boards. So if you as a developer are thinking about, oh, is this something that people really care about or not? I definitely think it is, because if that wasn't the case, then Bryan would have tons of stock of boxes of boards that he wasn't selling, right? But that's not what's happening at all. People are definitely very interested in this. And so Bryan, what do you want to tell folks that are interested in purchasing a Meadow board and started to play with it?
Yeah, so let me start with a story. So
Sure.
we last week, so we've been working on this new version of the Meadow board. We we did some upgrades to it based on feedback from our customers that were actually going out building production IoT, and we made some pretty awesome changes. We added actually, I'll show you a picture of the new hardware, which is, let me find that. So we upgraded the board, and we here it is. Just clicking around here. Don't mind me.
Sure.
So this is our new Meadow board that we just launched. This is the Meadow F7 V2, and it's honestly it's a beautiful, it's a piece of technical art. I have to say, hats off to our electrical engineer Sheldon for this thing and whatnot. So we did some, and it's also going to be available, by the way, in this core compute module, which is for folks that are going out to high volume, production, and this the module is at scale will be considerably cheaper, so you'll be able to get that for $30. But we did some big upgrades, and the F7 V2 includes a new. We doubled the flash. We upgraded the antenna, so now it's actually we get better service on our board than we do in our iPhones. And
Wow.
a big change that we did is that it's now fully SMT compatible. So SMT is surface mount technology, and the version 1 Meadow had some capacitors underneath on the bottom, and it had just through hole, these holes for headers. This new one has these castellated. It has these, and you can see it better in this photo. It has these castellated headers, so you can actually solder this straight down onto your board, which is that's a better compatibility with like high volume production. And we did some other things there, and we announced this last week, and we got our first shipment of boards from the new production. And we announced it, and with hours we sold out. So wow. we didn't expect to sell out. I would say this is a pleasant surprise, but we sold out within hours, and we were like, oh my gosh. So right. If you want to get a Meadow F7, they are on back order right now. But if you sign up for our newsletter, and I just pasted a link for you to share. If you sign up for our newsletter, you will get notified when more come back in stock, and we should have them we should have another batch in about a month.
About a month or so. Okay. So like Bryan said, so I'm showing the link right now in the bottom of the window, right over here. Where's my camera? There we go. Right over here somewhere. So go ahead and sign up for the newsletter if you're interested in getting a new board from Wilderness Labs. Now, last thing I want to ask you about, Bryan. So we talked about the industry, we saw a little bit of code, and then we, talked about the new boards and things of that nature. What are some other things that we can look forward to in terms of Meadow and just Wilderness Labs in like the next couple of months?
Sure. Yeah. So, it's been a fun journey, and we've been in beta for a long time with Meadow, and we're super excited as we, this last, release feels really good. This is the first really, it feels production ready, and we've got almost all of our V1.0 features launched now. We've got a couple of minor things, a couple of features left, and they're like almost ready. And so we're getting really close to V1.0, and V1.0 means production ready, means that if you develop a Meadow application, you can deploy it out to the world in production code and be able to update it over the air without having to go and plug in a USB, and all of our core features will be there and polished, and we'll lock the API, right? So one of the things is that as we've been in beta, one of the things is like, as we've designed these APIs and the MetaCore APIs and the sensor APIs and stuff, we've been really cognizant about, okay, today, a lot of these things work this way because maybe in 1972, some hardware engineer decided that that's the way that a serial port was going to work, right? And then there was 7 other designs that came after that because those were maybe not the best decisions, or maybe that was just an early decision and then had to change, right? And so we've been thinking about all of these API decisions and the shapes of the API and whatnot from a like a fresh perspective of like, okay, we know that this is how it works today. Is that how it should work? Is this really the best way to interact with hardware in this way? And so we've like really rethought a lot of the ways that you build hardware. And I think that we made a lot of things a lot better. But that required iterative, change. That required breaking APIs. It required rethinking and taking feedback from our customers and seeing how they're using it and reintegrating that. And as we, when we hit V1.0, that's sort of like, that sort of stops. We don't, we're giving a contract that says, okay, these APIs are stable. They're polished. There's going to be issues. There's going to be some bugs here and there, but this is going to be production ready. So that's a big thing. The other thing, and we're going to announce this tomorrow, but the listeners here get a little sneak preview. We're going to run our wildly successful Dev Camp again this year. Last year we ran Dev Camp 2020. It was our first conference, and we're actually going to do that right after NETconf. It's going to be on November 18th, I think it is. And we're going to have a full day of sessions and building hardware and real world hardware and IoT. And so that will be a lot of fun. So yeah, those are, kind of the big things that are happening right now. V1.0, NETconf. And we're just, we're pumping out new releases all the time. We've got really good R&D velocity right now, especially as we sort of approach this, production release.
So I'm really interested about that, like that Meadow Camp that you mentioned. So do I have to wait until tomorrow, or can you tell us like how do we sign up for it? Like what is it like? Like what are, for folks that weren't there last year, like what kind of experience then can they really expect from the camp?
Yeah, so we'll send out links tomorrow. The Eventbrite page isn't quite done. We're finalizing it tonight, but then we'll send out. Follow us on Twitter. So we're just Wilderness Labs on Twitter, and that's a great place to get information. Also, our newsletter. Our newsletter is really like that. Honestly, the newsletter is awesome because that's where we blast stuff out all the time. And so we'll send out a link. It'll be a virtual conference, as things are in the age of this COVID thing. But it'll be a full day, and we'll walk through all kinds of stuff. Intro to Meadow Foundation, and we'll probably do a little hardware design, maybe even show building a circuit, spinning a custom PCB board, which turns out is actually incredibly easy these days. And so we'll do kind of like a lot of real world Meadow stuff. We'll look at industrial protocols and whatnot, and yeah, it'll be fun. And we'll do some show and tell. Our customers have built some really interesting things, so they'll get to show some of those things off. Also, I got to say, and Jorge, our developer advocate, is just reminded me another place to check out some really cool stuff is our Hackster page. So I just pasted that. Our Hackster page has a pile of, honestly, it's a work of art. Jorge has been working on these diligently for the past couple of years, and you can see these are a bunch of things that you can build with Meadow today. And actually, one of my favorite is the Hack Kit Pro hacks. If you get a hack kit, we put together these hack kits, which has a whole bunch of components out of the box, so you don't have to go and like find this or that. It has everything you need. It has buttons and it has displays, it has motors, it has servos and rotary encoders, and all of these hacks can actually be built with a hack kit. And a hack kit is a very good deal. And yeah, there's just a pile of things that you can build with it. So check them out. Check out our Hackster stuff. And yeah.
And so Hackster, I'm looking at this. Excuse me. So this is a community for folks that are interested in learning about programming hardware, right? So
that's right.
So this would be another interesting place. If I know nothing about IoT, like I can come here and not only just learn about Meadow, but if I want to learn about, I don't know, other sensors that I could plug into my Meadow device and into my Meadow board, like this would be a cool place that I could do that.
Yeah, absolutely. Hackster's a great resource.
Great. All right. Well, Bryan, hey, this has been amazing. definitely thank you for coming on. Shout out to Jorge because I've seen him in the chat, like posting and messaging folks and answering questions. Definitely appreciate that, and definitely shout out to all of you that are stuck around and watch with us. I know I missed some countries earlier, and I don't want anyone to get mad and be like, "Oh, Cecil, you didn't call my country out." um, but I see we got folks here from the UK, from the Ukraine as well, from Belgium, from France, Colorado. Definitely got some US folks in here. Definitely shout out to you guys, and yeah, tons of other places. So again, thank you all for watching. Bryan, thank you for being here. This has been another episode of On.NET, and I hope you all join us again next week where we'll have more awesome guests talking about cool things in the world of .NET. So see you, everyone. Bye.
Adios. Thanks for having me, Cecil.